Why don't we start talking about the history of this band? So this week I read a book by Ronnie Van Zant's longtime childhood friend turned road manager and security guard, a guy named Gene Odom. And the book was called Lynyrd Skynyrd, Remembering the Freebirds of Southern Rock. And theirs is a tale of a wild band with a wild past and a tragic end. And that's something that I don't really ever think I had known. Maybe I knew just in passing the tragedy of the plane crash, which we'll get into, but I just never really thought about it until this week. So we'll get into that in a bit. But we're really going to start the story with the driving force of this band, and that is Ronnie Van Zant, who was born Ronald Wayne Van Zant on January 15th, 1948 in Jacksonville, Florida. We talked about Florida man. He's a Florida man. He's rocking it. So his father was a trucker driving big rig trucks up and down the East Coast. His mother basically raised the kids and worked at a donut shop overnight. So early on, Ronnie saw a lot of hard work in his family. His mom arguably worked harder than his dad because she had to take care of Ronnie and his 5 other siblings, all while working an overnight job. But that said, she was definitely a hands-off parent.
Wait, where were Meemaw and Papa while this was happening?
I didn't get to the grandparents' story, but the kids basically raised themselves. Just picture unsupervised kids running around with no shoes. But apparently the house was a pretty happy place. Kids were encouraged to enjoy life despite their humble surroundings. And by humble, I mean poor. They lived in an area with dirt roads, cinder block houses. Some houses on their block had no electricity, but there was something nearby that they called redneck heaven. And that was Speedway Park, Jacksonville's 1/5 of an eighth, 5/8 of a mile dirt racetrack, which was the hit of the town. This is what the kids did all the time. Now, they didn't have enough money to actually buy tickets, but they would go and they would climb the trees outside of the Speedway and watch the races.
Wow, I mean, that's another level of some redneckery because like going to the shows is pretty going to the race is pretty redneck, but being the poor person who has to climb the tree to watch the shit box cars drive around a dirt track.
So naturally, Ronnie, as a kid, wanted to be a NASCAR driver as well as a boxer and a football player, but at only 5'7", yeah, it was going to be tough.
Not a scientist, though. No, that wasn't part of this.
That was not in the stars. His first football scrimmage as a kid, he broke his ankle and needed pins in it. So that got him his 4F status so he wouldn't have to serve in the military. He tried boxing, but he got the shit kicked out of him early on, so he abandoned that, though he didn't abandon the idea of fighting. Despite his height, he was a tough little son of a bitch. He would fight anyone and everyone, which is a normal part of his day-to-day life, was just picking fights with people and beating them up.
How tall did he get?
A normal part of every short man's life.
Yeah.
Right.
Those guys fight hard.
How tall did he get as an adult?
Only 5'7".
Okay. Because I watched some live footage of them, and he had this thing where the microphone stand, if he actually stood it on its base, the microphone would have been like 2 feet above his head because he would hold it at an angle the whole time, which completely destroys the purpose of a mic stand. It's like you're already holding it in your hand and carrying it around. I was like, is that like a weird performance thing that you just want to carry the mic because it looks like you got a guitar? But maybe it was just a normal size mic stand and he was just a wee little fella.
So, I mean, it sounds like he was a bit of a dick. The book said that he inherited his father's mean streak, and he was kind of a bully, and that would kind of continue into his adulthood, and the way he would run the band. And he honestly sounds like a kid that we grew up with, and we'll bleep this here
of anybody, honestly.
Like short kid, had to fight everybody. Father was a redneck, taught him how to outrun the police. It's like I'm picturing him growing up to be in a band. So Ronnie ends up going to Robert E. Lee High School, which was actually one of the county's best schools. Yes, just get over the fact now that it was 1960 and all of the Confederate schools, all of the Southern schools were still named after Confederate generals and heroes and stuff like that.
I think it's fair to call them Confederate schools.
Yeah, because I think they were probably still whites only.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he still couldn't make the football team, huh? That one might not make it on the tape.
So he's at this school, but there were also a lot of upper crust kids there who were actually applying themselves and doing well. And seeing the way the other half lives, he decided he didn't want to be poor anymore. But doesn't everyone make that decision at some point, and then you either succeed or fail? It's not like that's a real groundbreaking decision. But if you were in Jacksonville at the time and you were a mediocre student, your options were to join the Navy or work for the railroad. So starting a band sounded like a pretty good option to get him out of town. So Ronnie drops out of high school, which was a move he actually regretted later in life, feeling that he had failed to live up to his father's expectations. He said at one point that he had put platinum records on his parents' wall, but never a diploma. But
and what was his physics teacher's name?
Yeah, I'm sure his dad probably like graduated from the 6th grade or something like that.
Jesus. Now, despite being a tough guy and a dropout, he actually discovered that a creative streak ran through him. But he discovered this in a very odd way. A place that he'd given up on, which was the boxing ring. So Ronnie said that Muhammad Ali was actually his inspiration to start writing because Ali gave him permission, and other tough guys permission, to be well-spoken and creative. And he remembers Ali's quick wit, his poetic language, and his ability to capture an audience with his words and not just his fists. He liked how Muhammad Ali would first insult you with a thought-provoking zinger and then kick your ass. So Ronnie starts keeping a journal of lyrics and poems that he starts writing, but he keeps it under his bed so that nobody sees it. Now, Ronnie's first band happened the way a lot of first bands start. He walked up to some poor kid after school and sucker punched him in the back of the head for no reason and walked away. The next day, Ronnie chats up this kid because he knew the kid was in a band and didn't remember that he had sucker punched him. So the kid with the concussion found out that Ronnie could sing and told him he should start his own band. So Ronnie starts his own band. Actually, you know what?
He's like, you can't join my band, though, because you're clearly an asshole. You literally just punched me in the fucking head. But no, you should totally just go start your own thing, man. That sounds great.
So a young Ronnie starts his own band. And by that, I mean he barges into the practice of another band called the Squires and tells them that he's their new lead singer. And it works. I assume because Ronnie's a bully. So his first real gig came, though, at a battle of the bands where this band that he forced his way into, the Squires, were performing. And it was actually a big event because Ronnie was already known around town as that tough as nails bully. And when people heard that he was going to front a band, like, what the hell are you talking about? So everybody in town showed up at this battle of the bands and they won. So Ronnie's inspired now.
Just another parallel to our band in high school. Like, we won a battle of bands. I was clearly known as the hot shit tough guy that everybody feared around town.
Was that the battle of the bands where I wore pleather pants?
Oh,
I couldn't afford
possibly.
leather pants. I think I wore pleather pants and a velour shirt.
Didn't we go to Goodwill and spend like $25 buying outfits for that? That was the one where, yeah, we won that. It was at AI
It was at the
DuPont, right?
basement of the school. Oh, it was at the, it was at that other
yeah.
school.
And just for the audience's benefit, what would be the closer in the set, in a set like this? What was the go-to number?
Oh, I think we were doing Ants Marching.
Oh, because we had the kid who played violin that we would bring
Yes.
out for the last song, and we do a Dave Matthews song with the violinist, and people are like, "What? That's crazy!"
God, they're amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so Ronnie, after they win this, he's inspired, but he decided that the band he was in was not going to be good enough to take him where he needed to be, which was stardom. So he quits. And I think this determination is due to the fact that that same year in 1965, the Rolling Stones performed at the Jacksonville Coliseum. He went to this show. Oddly, though, the 8,000 person venue was only half full, apparently because the local radio stations didn't play the Stones because of songs like Let's Spend the Night Together.
So I imagine he just climbed a tree outside the venue and was looking in that way. They're like, listen, no shirt, no shoes, no entry, buddy. And he's like, oh, dadgummit. All right.
So it's at this rock concert that Ronnie decides he's going to become Mick Jagger, albeit a redneck version of him. So Ronnie puts together another band with a group of guys who called themselves the Noble Five. And this is basically the first iteration of what would become Lynyrd Skynyrd, and consisted of Ronnie on vocals, a guy named Bob Burns on drums, Larry Junstrom on bass, and two guitar players, Gary Rossington and Alan Collins. Now,
Well,
they're all kids. Go ahead.
the Noble Five, that sounds like a reference to Buddhism. That doesn't fit with my understanding of this character.
I
I
picture
was
like
going to go
a
with the
barbershop
periodic table.
group.
Oh, that's how many
There's
noble
no way he
gases
knew what
are
the
there?
periodic table was. Come on.
Or the Five Noble Truths of Buddha.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's like, well, you know, my Eastern religions class that I got at Robert E. Lee High School taught me.
So this band was restricted to dances, parties, teen clubs since they were all still kids. And at this point, in 1966, the band members are between the ages of 14 and 18 years old. Ronnie's the oldest. So they were a cover band at this point and played almost exclusively British invasion covers. And their first attempt at recording was in a friend's house in 1967. They recorded some anti-war song. Obviously, it went nowhere, but it was a fun experience. So the Noble Five eventually changes their name to the 1%. This is such a high school band thing to do, from like week to week, be like, no, we're this band now. They're called the 1%. And at the time, top 40 cover bands are all the rage. So they had no problem finding work. The band got a gig as the house band at a place called Art Einstein's Comic Book Club, a gig that they held for 8 months straight. They were playing 6 nights a week, sometimes doing 10-hour sets on the weekends, playing from 5 to 11:30 for the underage crowd, and then continuing from 11:30 until 3 a.m. for the adult crowd. So these guys are getting their reps in.
Good Lord. How many bits were they getting for that?
Not a lot. All right, now we got to put a pin in this one, and we're going to go out to California for a minute, because in the late 60s, Los Angeles is the hub of musical activity in the wake of the British invasion. Mamas and the Papas, the Doors, the Grateful Dead, the Byrds, they're all trying to make new sounds, trying to get out of the folk revival that dominated the prior 2 decades. Now, there was a band that was based out of the South who was trying to make their way into this scene, a band that would sometimes share a venue with these top 40 cover bands at the time. And that was Daytona Beach's own Dwayne and Greg Allman. They were playing on the Florida circuit in a band called the Escorts in 1964. And in 1965, they became the Allman Joys and started playing around in the southern states.
Hold on. I was not aware that they were originally called the Almond Joys. That's delightful.
Without the D. That is delightful.
That is delightful.
So in 1967, though, Dwayne and Greg, they form another band called Hourglass. That band heads out to LA. They actually record and release 2 albums, but those albums take off. So the brothers return home to the South, where they would eventually form the Allman Brothers.
Take off? You said those albums take off?
They never took off.
But they never take off. Okay,
Right.
That's my thing.
So the brothers return home to the South, where they would eventually form the Allman Brothers Band in 1969. But Ronnie and his band are watching Dwayne and Greg and getting a real sense that they can make it too, because here's another group of long-haired country boys from Florida who are cutting albums in Los Angeles. And now the drummer, Bob Burns, remembers one time when the 1% opened for the Hourglass. Dwayne and Greg told the band, "You guys are amazing, but you're going nowhere if you keep playing cover music." Dwayne gave them some advice. He told them they needed to find a place where they can practice 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night. Also, go get a tape recorder. So that's exactly what they did. They pulled their money together and rented a shack in the woods 20 miles outside of Jacksonville in the town of Russell, Florida.
You have to rent those? It's a shack in the woods.
They're not
You
just
like go in
free
and clear
at
the
first
possums
take.
out. Like, it's yours.
Sorry, hang on. Yes, sorry, my Outlook is freaking out and making noise. 1 second. So they would affectionately nickname this shack Hell House. They practiced 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, no air conditioning. And Ronnie had this idea that if they were going to make it, they would have to work harder than everyone else. He had this insane work ethic that he imposed on himself and everyone else in the band, too, which is kind of interesting. How many times in history you have the intersection of a musician or a writer and also a hard work ethic? I feel like those two are usually mutually exclusive. And when
Add
they
to
do
that,
come
a high school
together,
dropout.
right? I've just known so many guitar players that are amazing, but they just lack the drive to go do something. They're just
Hey, Phil's not
content.
here. Just don't talk shit on him, okay?
Damn it, was it that obvious? So by 1969, at only 21 years old, Ronnie is already a perfectionist and a taskmaster. And as the group got better, Ronnie had higher and higher expectations for them. He was known to impose punishment on the band. Namely, if you were late or you screwed up too much or you didn't take it seriously, he would just haul off and punch you at practice. Why these guys hung around, I don't know. I feel like that's probably a good excuse to leave, but I guess it kind of worked out.
The beatings will
Rob?
continue until morale improves.
Well, Rob, I was going to say, I'm starting to see some parallels to the band that you and I were in after college,
Oh, come
where
on. I
Rob
never,
would impose homework upon us and then fine us monetarily if we didn't do it.
no physical violence, though, to be clear.
No
It
physical
was
violence.
just psychological torture.
At that time, though, as poor as we were, that was worse than physical violence. I would have taken a punch in the face for $5, definitely.
Confetti ain't free, Tom.
All right. So, in addition to following Duane Allman's advice on practicing, they also followed his advice on getting away from cover music. And as part of their 7-day-a-week practice schedule, everyone was expected to bring new ideas daily to Hell House, where Greg would evaluate them and either keep them or trash them.
Wait, by the way, didn't you guys also call your practice space the sweat box or something?
We did call it practice,
yes.
yeah.
Phil's dad's, like a basement in
No,
Phil's
it was
house?
Phil's room at his dad's house that
Oh my
they'd
God.
moved all the furniture like into the closet and stuffed it all in there. And then we had to play with no PA. So we had headphones on with just the vocals, but then Mike, who was the loudest drummer I've ever played with to this day, was in this tiny room just breaking sticks
an-
every third
An
song.
8x8 room with
Yeah.
no baffles on the walls. It was
And
unbelievable.
we had to keep the windows closed because
Because of
you
the
can spit out the
neighbors.
window and hit his neighbor's house. So
Yeah. Piles of sweat, pools
Yeah.
of sweat.
yeah, it smelled really bad.
Just drawing another parallel between you guys and Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yeah, I
that's
think
all.
maybe. Yeah, we got some
Seriously.
redneck roots, man. And
Oh,
so in
yeah.
May,
Well, I mean, we got some poor roots. Is what
Yeah,
we're
right.
actually talking about.
So in May of 1969, the 1% go into a small studio called Norm Vincent Studio in Jacksonville, Florida. And they recorded a single of original stuff, an A-side that was called, the A-side of this single was a song called Need All My Friends, which we'll play here. All right, so their first outing, that kind of sounds like watered down Allman Brothers, you know?
Yeah. It's a song about, man, I need friends and I need people around me from a guy who, as you're describing, is notorious for punching people in the face with very little provocation. It's like, I wonder
Can't
why
figure out
people
the
don't want to
reason.
spend any time around me. What tarnation's going on here?
So that same year, they renamed the band to Lynyrd Skynyrd. And the story of the name, as is probably well known, we already mentioned it here, that it was a take on their high school gym teacher named Leonard Skinner, though Ronnie Van Zant was not actually at the school when Skinner started teaching. However, Gary, the guitar player, and Bob, the drummer, were the only two guys who had Skinner as a teacher after they had left. And they would joke about Leonard Skinner bursting into their rehearsals to bust them for smoking pot. So that name stuck because it was a reoccurring joke that kept coming up during rehearsals. So they stuck with Lynyrd Skynyrd.
At what point were they like, what's the dumbest way to spell this? So bad that we have to give instructions on pronunciation in our debut album.
Well, I'll just say that
Oh,
every time I attempted to type it this week as I was taking notes, my fingers got lost every time.
your brain exploded.
Yeah, my fingers like rebelled. They're like, that just can't be right.
No.
No, that's an E. That's clearly an E. Stop typing Y.
I want to laugh about the pronunciation based title as well, but it did seem to work, right? We do all know how to pronounce
Totally.
their band
You
name.
don't call Lynyrd Skynyrd. Yeah.
But you're just throwing roadblocks in your way to success there. You're like, let's have an unpronounceable name so that we have to introduce ourselves with it. Like, they could have just called this album fucking Freebird or something like that. That's not a bad album title, you know?
It reminds me of an interview that Moxie Fruvis, which is a Canadian band from the 90s, they gave an interview and the person said, like, why did you pick Moxie Fruvis as a name? And the guy said, well, we wanted something that was hard to remember and didn't mean anything.
Yeah. And I'm sure all of the Moxie Fruvis albums on the list, we will have to retell that story multiple times, you know. There's
Oh, I'm going to get it
7
in.
of them on there.
Yeah, way to cannibalize their future content, Adam. Jeez.
All right, so we're going to level set real quick. It's 1969. The band has their permanent name, and it consists of Ronnie Van Zant. He's 21. Gary Rossington on guitar. He's only 17. Alan Collins on guitar. He's also 17. Larry Junstrom on bass. He's 20. And Bob Burns on drums, who is 18. Now, I mentioned that single that they recorded. It got a little bit of local airplay, but didn't really do much. So now we... Sorry, guys.
The problem was DJ's inability to pronounce the name, obviously.
Right. Okay, are you guys ready for me to give my big reveal about what my cover band name was? I've avoided it for 180 episodes.
Oh,
Because it
yeah,
has
that's
to deal
right.
with-
It's never come up.
Because people could not pronounce it. We were called Mo Fo. Fo.
Now make it better by explaining it.
Can't believe I'm doing this. Fo was spelled F-A-U-X.
Mofox.
So we would get no facts and we were going to play, and it was always Mo Fax. And people, I don't know, they just didn't know that name. We were a little too, I don't know, ambitious with what people could
A
pronounce.
little too highfalutin there. Yeah.
in my
For a band
bar
playing,
band, played
living
Jesse's
on a prayer
Girl.
every night.
Right.
try to throw some French at people.
Yeah.
Don't you
Oh,
know
and-
who we are?
And also playing Sweet Home Alabama. Let's not fucking mince
Yeah.
words here.
All
I'm
right,
sure
yes.
you've played that, you know, approaching the amount of times it's been streamed on Spotify.
That's a good point. It probably
Right.
literally was in every set you ever played. Is that accurate?
It
Adam?
was, yeah. I was trying to just do a round number, and I played for 10 years, at least 200 gigs a year, and we absolutely paid Sweet Home Alabama every time. So I just did, 200 times 10, and you get 2,000. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Don't forget, we played that in our band Gelner back in the day too.
Oh,
We definitely
God.
played Sweet Home Alabama. 'Cause
All right,
I
so-
remember even by the end of we played like the St. E's Fair or whatever, and we had to play 2 5-hour sets. I think we played that maybe 4 times over the course of those 2 5-hour sets.
Wait for the tent to clear out, and you're like, all right, we can restart the set.
Yep.
Nobody else knows what we're doing. All right. So the same time in 1969, the Allman Brothers formed and were signed to a brand new label called Capricorn Records, which was set up by Jerry Wexler, the renowned producer and executive at Atlantic Records, Phil and Alan Walden, and a guy named Frank Fenter. So Capricorn set up shop in Macon, Georgia, just to be close to their first and most successful act, the Allman Brothers. So the execs at Capricorn, though, felt that there was a lot of untapped talent in the South and wanted to start grabbing some of this for their new label.
No,
So
they were like, listen, we can sell those fucking Hicks some records, all right? Untapped
Jesus
talent in the
Christ.
South, even untapped market in the South. They're like, they got jobs down there now? Like, we can actually
Gotta capture
money.
that. Gotta
They got
capture
money.
that. Capture that watching the dirt bike race from the tree demographic.
It was stock cars, first off, you asshole.
Well, butter my backside and call me a biscuit, Adam.
Oh, that's good.
All right. So Alan Walden, who originally helped set up the label, used to manage Otis Redding, but after Otis's death, he was looking for new talent, not on behalf of Capricorn, though. He just wanted to manage. So he was invited to a warehouse in Jacksonville to hear 13 13 bands play for a showcase. Lynyrd Skynyrd was the 13th, and by the end, Alan was blown away with Skynyrd.
I like how he's like, I was just managing Otis Redding. He's dead. Is there a band that wouldn't let him move into their neighborhood? Let's find that band. Let's go down to Jacksonville and see what they got.
I'm looking to move on to another band that also has a tragic plane crash in their future.
Still using that same travel agent, apparently.
Jesus Christ. Oh, man. I'll give Rob's and Tom's email for the complaints tonight.
Mm-hmm. You can write to Alan at 1000. Right.
Speaking of Alan, their manager, this guy, Alan, pitched himself to manage the band, and they signed a contract with him. So Alan Walden wanted to get the band into the studio as quickly as possible, and he tried to secure time for the band in Muscle Shoals in Alabama, but was only able to lock down a time in August of 1971, which was over a year away. And that's a great spot for our favorite segment, By the Numbers.
Keep them single digits, all right? The Lynyrd Skynyrd fans out there won't be able to keep up on it.
Can I just say right now, I friggin' love Lynyrd Skynyrd. I've been trying to like ease into it, but call me like a northern redneck, but these guys rock. All right.
I like the band.
Your mom did pronounce it Washington, so let's go down to Washington, D.C.
I like the record too, but non-Americans have to understand that shitting on the South is a northern pastime. You got to just give us that.
Yeah, since 1865, baby.
That's right.
All right, our first number is the number 38. It's in 38 Special. Known for the song Hold On Loosely, that was fronted by Ronnie's brother, Donnie Van Zant, who formed that band in 1974. No, yeah.
Ronnie and Donnie. All right.
Let me just double check that. 38 Special front band.
Who cares? The fans need to write in about something, Adam.
Donnie Van Zant. Yes. All right. All right. Next number is 0. That is the number of times it was actually funny or clever when some drunk asshole screamed out Freebird at the end of the night for the 10 years that I was playing in bars.
Did you ever play it, though?
No, we never sat down to learn it. Although I did play with guitar players who probably could have handled it.
Yeah, but you also need 2 more guitar players.
Right. 6 guitars on stage. We could.
And then a bass player plays like a guitar player. It's a very complicated operation. No, actually, do you have any information on how that became the thing that people do? Like, did they invite that kind of? That's the one song that people shout out, or when they do the lighters, that's what people say. So even though it's cliche, like, where did it start?
I don't know where it started.
I think that it was the Great Asshole Convention of 1987, where they all got together and decided that we're all going to drive IROC Z's. The mullet is still cool. Don't worry about it. Cut off jeans work. And Freebird is the only thing that you can ever request at any live performance.
All right. Our next number is again 0. That is the number of original members of Lynyrd Skynyrd who are currently playing in the live lineup that is touring. Just a money-making machine at this point.
They could just like change the name slightly, replace one of those Y's with like an IE or something like that.
Skynyrd, Lynyrd. All right, our next number is 5. That is the number of studio albums put out by the band with lead singer Ronnie Van Zant at the helm. But after a 14-year hiatus, the band, in some various iterations, continued to put out an additional 9 albums through 2012. 2 million. That's right. That is the number of 2 million. That is the number of copies that this album sold. It went double platinum in the USA with an additional 3 million albums. 3 million albums sold globally. They're actually kind of big in England and Japan. So they said. So UK folks. Oh, crap. Is it British people, English people, UK folks? Oh, man, I'm going to get another email.
You compounded your error.
I did. Let us know.
Welsh, let us know.
Right. Let us know if you like Lynyrd Skynyrd. 1.3 billion. That is the streams just on Spotify of Sweet Home Alabama. which would be on their follow-up album to this one. But Freebird comes in at roughly half that with 673 million streams.
People are stupid. That's what that tells me. They just want to be spoon-fed crap. And this is from a guy who likes Billy Joel. Okay.
Oh, I love me some Joel too.
Yeah.
240, as in the Convair 240. That is the type of airplane that the band was using for their 1977 tour that we'll have more on later. Spoiler alert, it's not a happy ending. And lastly, we're going to round it out with the number 2. That is the number of clicks it will take for you to open up the notes on this episode and click the email address there in the episode details. We would love to add you to our email list. No spam here, don't worry. Instead, we'll send the occasional email with updates about the show, opportunities to vote on upcoming albums, and maybe even some random facts that can help you sound like an insufferable know-it-all at your next dinner party or social gathering. All you have to do is compose an email to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com with "add me" in the subject line, and we'll take care of the rest. All right, when we last left the band, they had to hurry up and wait for time in the studio, over a year of waiting because the studio was booked solid. Now, at this time, they're not actually signed to Capricorn Records. They just happen to have a manager who was the brother of one of the owners at Capricorn.
So quick question here. Is that the only studio in the South? Is that why they have to wait a year? They're like, we want to get you into Muscle Shoals. There's literally zero other recording options that they could have. Waiting a year seems kind of ridiculous.
They really wanted to get in there. I think it's the space. Having listened to everybody who has played in Muscle Shoals, including all the studio guys, they're like, there's just something about that room. In fact,
it's probably because it was whites only.
Right. God,
I'm sorry. I just like America in the 60s and 70s was so fucked up. It's, especially in the South.
Especially the South. I just looked it up. I was surprised to learn that it's like a 9-hour drive between Jacksonville and Muscle Shoals. They're not nearly as close as I thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dude, Florida is a fucking big country.
Huge state.
I remember, country. I wish it was his own country. Florida is a huge state. I remember driving down to Florida, Rob, when we were going to the New Year's Eve 1999 Fish concert.
Sure.
And we were like, yeah, we got to the state line of Florida. We're almost there. And it's like 9 more hours. Jesus Christ. What the hell, man?
So what do you do when you have a year off waiting to get into the studio? Well, you rehearse like crazy, you gig, and you become raging alcoholics. And that brings us to tonight's album. Actually, no, I'm lying. The band had a false start. So they eventually go into Muscle Shoals, paying out of pocket with the help of Alan Walden. But the band kind of falls apart temporarily, just in time for the recording to start. So Bob Burns, their drummer, has a mental breakdown. Their bass player, Larry Youngstrom, was ejected by their manager. And those 2 spots were filled by a drummer and bass player from another band. And one of the roadies, because you'll notice that piano was not in their original lineup, they found out that one of their roadies, a guy named Ronnie Powell, turns out he was a badass and accomplished keyboard player. So they had him join the sessions too. But the Muscle Shoals sessions did not have a producer. They were recorded by Jimmy Johnson, who was a guitarist and co-owner of the studio, but not a producer. So all the tracks they put down sounded like demos. So that super sucks. But now Alan Walden, as the manager, has to take these albums out to LA and try to get a record company to buy into it. And they were rejected by 9 in a row, including Capricorn. No good. So it's a big bummer for the band, but things are about to take a turn for the better. The band still gigging constantly, and they wind up playing a few weeks at a place called Funocchio's. Yes, Funocchio's. Pinocchio, but with fun, which, judging by the description of the band, kind of sounded like the Mos Eisley Cantina. And in January of 1973, while playing there, the band just happens to be seen by Al Kooper. Al Kooper, of course, is a musician and songwriter that worked with the Stones, Bob Dylan. I didn't know that he had formed Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And in 1973, And in 1972, he had relocated to Georgia to work with the Atlanta rhythm section. And just by chance, he happened to see Skynyrd at Finocchio's one night.
Do you know if Al Cooper ever happened to work with Alice Cooper at any point in his career? That would have been pretty nice.
Yeah,
Would have
that
been
would've
pretty
been
cool.
My favorite Al Cooper story is totally off the tangent here. It's a tangent, but is that he showed up to the Bob Dylan Highway 61 sessions with his guitar because he was a guitar player, and he's just like sitting on the by, just like waiting for someone to maybe call him in. And Bob at some point goes, "We need an organ player," and he just stands up, even though he does not play organ. And he ends up playing the organ part on Like a Rolling Stone, which is like the most iconic part of the song.
Yep.
Dude, that's awesome. That's what you got to do.
There was that period of time that he was on the Conan O'Brien show as like a guest musician in the band for like a week on the Conan O'Brien show. And like I think that almost every single outro music to a commercial, he just do 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 and then like a Rolling Stone. I was like, I mean, it's cool to be on the Conan show, but like that's a little sad. They're just like, no. Just play that. That's all that we want to hear from you.
That was me. That little diddly do. That was me. That's me. That's mine.
So Al Cooper has a lot of clout and influence at this time, and he loved what he saw and he heard from the band. So he goes to MCA Records, who allowed him to set up his own label called Sounds of the South just to represent Skynyrd, since Capricorn didn't want them anymore. So Alan Walden negotiated a contract with Al Cooper for only $9,000. And that contract sucked, but it was the only thing in town since Capricorn, which was the Southern rock label, had already turned them down. And there's no place else for a group of Southern white rednecks. So they're all ready to jump into the studio again, but this time their bassist gets cold feet and leaves the band. And this is where, Tom, you had mentioned that Ed King, who they had met prior, was in a band called Strawberry Alarm Clock. So they called him up, knowing that he's a guitar player, and said, "Do you want to play bass?" He was the first non-Southerner in the band. So they brought him on, and he was subjected to endless rehearsals and prep for the recording sessions. And the band kind of hated him because he wasn't from the South.
That's the band that does Incense and Peppermint? Is that the one I'm thinking of?
That is the
people
big
from
one.
the South were prejudiced against somebody because he wasn't like them? Are you crazy? It showed up with this like frilly shirt on. He's like, "Hey guys, incense and peppermints."
I was watching a documentary, and this guy, Ed King, said the same thing happened to Strawberry Alarm Clock that happened to the Zombies, which is some random promoter put together a band called Strawberry Alarm Clock and was just touring throughout the South using their name and making a lot of money on live shows, but it totally wasn't the band.
Interesting. You know, I will say this. Ed King, you hear Strawberry Alarm Clock and you think, you know, frilly Victorian boy with like streamers on a hat or something like that. Look at his picture on Wikipedia. It looks like when they're like, and then they found 17 bodies in his basement type of guy. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that I'd be making fun of in a dark bar. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's like a Sasquatch picture. It's out of focus. It's taken on the run.
Well, that was 73. He looks a lot more normal now that he's a grown man in the 90s or 2000s, whenever the documentary was made.
Well, you know, he got that Skynyrd money. He doesn't have to survive off a fatback and corn pone anymore.
Tom, do you have a list of words that you're just working your way to?
Oh no, I just like fatback and corn pone. I was thought that would be like if I had like my Southern Variety Hour TV show, we'd be fatback and corn pone.
If Tom had his druthers, he'd be eating fatback and corn pone all the time.
All right, so we have finally arrived at tonight's album, and that is the recording of Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. So the band goes into the studio on March 27th, 1973 in Duraville, Georgia, along with his new bass player, Ed King, and Billy Powell, who is now the permanent keyboard player. Al Cooper is the producer, and he noted two things, which I thought was very interesting that I never realized about this band. One, they were insanely well rehearsed, like the most rehearsed a band he's ever seen. Number two, they never, as in never, improvised. Every guitar line, every solo was worked out as a composition and played exactly the same in every take until they nailed it.
That is interesting, and I want to talk about that in the context of some of the solos we're going to hear. But can I tell you what I just realized? And I've been staring at the damn title of the piece of the album all week. I've been pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah. What do you even pronounce it? Lynyrd?
Lynyrd Skynyrd. I've been pronouncing it Lynyrd Skynyrd my whole life. So look, I take everything back about the prescience of this album title. They screwed it up still.
Yeah.
All right, so
it's gonna come up later, but I'm gonna call bullshit on the everything was exactly the same every time. That just can't be true. It can't be true. And I think we can point to some specific examples of when it was not true.
Yeah, I can also show you a spot where they've clearly fucked up on the tape and left it in. So
yeah.
I didn't say they didn't screw up, but that
they just fucked it up the same way every time.
Exactly.
I've been in that scenario, by the way.
So they spend 6 weeks in the studio re-recording 5 songs from that failed effort in Muscle Shoals and 3 new songs they'd recently composed. And this was one of the first times that Ronnie relinquished control to someone else. It was a big deal. He trusted Al. Thank God, because I think Al made this sound the way it does. I think he defined the Skynyrd sound. In addition to what the band is playing, I think that the way he produced this has its own unique sound. And one funny note, something Rob had mentioned on our text thread, is that Simple Man was like Freebird revisited, right? And apparently they didn't have enough material for the album, which I don't understand. And that's where Simple Man came from. They all got done and they're like, hang on, we need one more song. So they write Simple Man. And here's my thought. And I think this happened on it might have been the Guess Who album, is that I think the band was just playing, and Al Cooper and the band's manager knew what the contract was with MCA, and the contract said we need 40 minutes, and they delivered 38 or whatever it is. The band has no idea. They just wrote the songs, like, here you go, and then they come back and they go, guys, actually we need 4 more minutes, so they write Simple Man, which I am not a huge fan of. It feels like a throwaway.
It's definitely the least of the trilogy.
Yeah. And, you don't want to fuck around with MCA. Famously, a lot more of a hard ass than Ad Rock or Mike D. He's not a kind of guy you want to trifle with.
He's always smoking dust in the back of the bus.
All right. So the album was released on August 13th, 1973. And this was a funny note in the book. They said once they had constantly been living with the comparison of the Allman Brothers. And they said once they started doing press for the album, the comparisons to the Allman Brothers immediately stopped. Skynyrd were definitely not the Southern white hippies that the Allman Brothers were. And instead, these redneck bikers are like, oh, you guys are definitely not the Allman Brothers. So after it was released, the band gets the opportunity to open for The Who for 13 shows on their Quadrophenia tour, and that is when they just took off, and that's when the band really broke and the album sales went nuts. Now, before we jump into the songs, we have to talk about the tragic end to this band, and that is the plane crash on October 20th of 1977. So I had an additional by the numbers that I threw at the end because I didn't want it to be super depressing. But the number 26, that's the number of people on board the Convair 240 airplane on October 20th of 1977. And to hear the author of the book recount it, it was obviously terrifying, but the plane had been having mechanical issues a couple flights before this happened. So they would look out the window and there would be flames shooting out of the right engine. So he was kind of spooked, and they had met with the pilots and everything and said, look, we don't want to fly. We think we need to have the plane looked at. And the pilots and everybody was like, don't worry, we'll have the plane examined once we get to Baton Rouge. So despite their better judgment, they get on the plane. And oddly enough, it was not the engine problem that caused the crash. So, one second. It turns out the plane had a malfunctioning fuel gauge, which led the pilots to underfuel the plane. So the plane straight up ran out of gas.
Oof.
And so the author of the book was saying that he'd been in multiple car crashes in his life, and car crashes happen like this immediately. He said a plane crash is way different. Obviously, you're in the air and it goes quiet. And now you're stuck with your thoughts for the 2 to 3 minute descent to death. So it's quite a harrowing recounting of the story, but the author of the book was Ronnie Van Zant's bodyguard. Ronnie had recently taken some sleeping pills to try to get some sleep, so he was kind of out of it. When the engines died, everybody started freaking out, and his bodyguard went and got him and tried to strap him into a chair. And he then strapped himself into a chair as well. He thinks, but he's not sure, that Ronnie, just in kind of a stupor, unbuckled his seatbelt. So the plane is coming down. Everyone can hear the tops of the trees hitting the bottom of the plane, and they know it's about to happen. And the pilots apparently then extended the landing gear, which basically caught on the trees, and then they hit a huge tree. The plane broke in half, and Ronnie Van Zant was thrown out of the plane and hit a tree and was killed on impact. So 6 people died in this whole thing, including Ronnie and both pilots. So a tragic end to the story, really heartbreaking as well, because even the folks who survived still walk around with such guilt, like that, like the bodyguard. Like, if I had just let Ronnie sit in the back on the floor sleeping wherever he was, maybe he would have survived.
I mean, could the biggest tragedy be that Lynyrd Skynyrd started making albums again in 1991, though? Could that be the actual biggest tragedy?
Well, true Skynyrd fans acknowledge that the band ended in 1977 with the plane crash.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, what do you say we jump into some of these?
You told me to take chances, Rob.
That's good. I was just going to say silver lining. I can't believe anyone survived that after that description. That's crazy.
Yeah, only 6.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yep. All right, gents, what do you say we dive into some tunes?